Welcome to Asian American Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month 2022 celebration kickoff event. Today we are going to learn about history of Chinese Americans. Before we start the presentation, all attendees' cameras and the microphones are turned off during the presentation. Please feel free to type in your questions in the chat box anytime. After the presentation, during the Q&A session, you can raise your hand to ask questions. And once you are called, you can turn on your microphone and the camera if we have enough time. After finish, you please shut off your camera and the microphone. This event will be recorded and available for review later for those who cannot attend today. Link will be sent out in an email to all the employees. The presentation slides will also be available. And good news is 2 prizes will be drawn from the list of employees who registered for the event. At the end of the event, you have to be present to win the prize. So please make sure to stay till the end. Now I would like to invite the moderator for today's event, our Executive Director, Asansa Jiang Smith, to open the kickoff event and introduce our guest. Asansa, all yours.
Hi, everybody. I want to first start by wishing you a wonderful and happy Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. This is a month to celebrate all our very diverse heritage. A lot of times people talk about a melting pot, but I had a great mentor who said, no, we are more like a beautiful tapestry of many cultures and colors. And we don't lose our identity. We are each very individual as strands, but together we form a beautiful picture of our heritage. And I'd like to think that is very accurate. I wanted to start first by just a little bit of pause. We just this week lost a very mighty leader in our Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander community. His name is Norman Mineta. He had he was a friend. He was my former boss. He was the mayor of San Jose. He went on to be a member of Congress for 20 years, and he also ended up being the transportation secretary during 9/11 and kept a lot of us safe and free. He ended up winning the presidential um, medal of honor as well. But a significant story about, we were talking here, it's very relative about back history. He had been interned during World War II in the internment camps, the Japanese American internment camps when he was 10. And so I just wanted to mention that to commemorate his wonderful efforts. He got reparations for the Japanese Americans who were interned. And later on, he went to create the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus. So again, his name is Norman Yoshio Mineta. And if you've not heard of him or read up on him, please Google him, and you'll just see what an amazing amount of contributions he's made, not just to our community, but to our American society. So I just wanted to start that off. Since he was 90, he just passed a couple days ago. But today we are here to talk about Chinese American history and a review of that. And a lot of times when many of us are taught history, the ethnic history of different groups within our country are not highlighted, and sometimes they're not even known. So I am really delighted that we have Ms. Tian Kathy Huang here, who will tell us a little bit more about the Chinese American history, which has been just really amazing in literally the physical building of our country and infrastructure, and the intellectual infrastructure as well. But let me tell you a little bit more about Tian Kathy Huang. She's the co-founder of the Historical Records of Chinese Americans, which is an online publication on the history of Chinese Americans in the Chinese language. She is also a writer and a guest speaker of the history of Chinese Americans. It's a TV program series on Sinovision Net. It's a TV station in New York City. She is also the president of the Chinese American History Foundation of New York. So I'm really delighted and excited to hear what Ms. Huang has to share with us regarding our Chinese American history. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Ms. John Smith, for a kind introduction. It is a great honor and a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. Can I share my slide now?
Please.
Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, let me share a brief history of Chinese Americans. It will be in several sections. Number one, Old China Trade. Number two, building the transcontinental railroads. Number three, the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. Number four, 62 years under the Chinese Exclusion Act. Number five, the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act. Number six, the anti-Asian hate. A couple of years ago, I found a headstone in downtown Boston. And this young man was 19 years old when he fell down from a mast of a ship in Boston. That was 1798. His name is Chow. That's the only thing we know about him. He was buried by his captain, John Boyd Jr. John Boyd Jr. and his cousins, under Captain Robert Gray, discovered the Columbia River and took the outer furs from the West Coast to China and brought back tea, porcelain to Boston. Okay, this is part of the old China trade, and this is the beginning of US-China relationship. Here we see a picture of John Boyd Jr., who buried this 19 years old Chinese man. And you can still find this headstone in downtown Boston. Boston, next to Boston Common Park, there is a cemetery, old burying ground. And this is where the tombstone is at. And in the middle, you see the ship that where John Boyd Jr. and his brother discovered the Columbia River. Okay, Old China trade was initiated by the China Empress sailing to China in 1784, which was 6 months after the establishment of the United States. In the middle, you see this this sail with American flag. This is the China Empress arriving at China, Canton Harbor. And the British introduced the tea from China to colonial America. But at that time, British controlled overseas trade until American independence. See, then after this independence, American merchants started old China trade between US and China. In the Boston Tea Party, the tea packs were dumped into sea are tea from China. And also when George Washington rewarded his officials with tea from China because they couldn't pay them with cash. And here we have some documents from Harvard Business School. In the middle, you see the silk samples from China, and the year was 1850. And on the right side, you see a Herd family opium trade record. This is all kept in Harvard Business School. And on the left side, you see porcelain that belongs to George Washington. And on the bottom, you see that's a teacup from John Adams. Very soon, American merchants followed the British to smuggle opium into China because it was very profitable. And but British controlled production and the warehousing of opium in India. And on the right side, these are the statistics provided by Peabody Access Museum in Salem, Massachusetts, about how much opium was shipped into China, was smuggled into China. Okay. Harvard professor John Fairbanks said, the opium trade was the most long-continued systemic international crime of modern times. And this is flyer from Qing Dynasty government telling people not to use opium. Here you can see a family, a good family destroyed by opium. And there is an article by Martha Berbinger about, the title is How Profits from Opium Shaped 19th Century Boston. She listed many institutions who benefited from opium trade. And Columbia, let me give you one example. This Columbia Law Memorial Library. And Seth Low inherited a fortune. Seth Low was the president of Columbia University. Seth Low inherited a fortune in 1904 from his father, and he built Columbia University Law Memorial Library the following year. This is to remember his father, and his father is an opium smuggler in China. There are many instances like this. And also about US Industrial Revolution. For example, Lowell, Massachusetts textile mill started Industrial Revolution in America. And all the three investors had made fortune from old China trade. On the right side, top right side, this is John Cleve Green. He was a major donor of the Princeton University. And he got his fortune from China trade, which is predominantly opium. And even in the White House, there is a China, but this is a porcelain. This is about, even today, there is a China room in White House, which keeps the porcelains from every single president. So there was a very important trade relationship in early US-China relations. When the gold was, okay, let's go to second part, building Continental Railroad. When the gold was discovered in California in 1848, Chinese were among the miners who arrived from all around the world. But there is a case. We can see how Chinese were treated. The case name is People versus Hall. Hall brothers and their friends killed a Chinese miner in an armed robbery. They were guilty in the first trial, but the murderer were set free in appeal because the lawyer said, according to California law, Chinese had no rights to testify in court against whites. Because according to California law, the Indians, Negro, Black, and White are genetic terms. Designating race, Chinese, they say Chinese and all other people are not white are included in the prohibition from being witness against white. The law also said Chinese are a race of people. No, the court documents say Chinese are a race of people whom nature has marked as inferior. See, we are of opinion that testimony was inadmissible. That's why all those murders were set free. The first transcontinental continental railroad was completed in 1869. Let's look at two reasons. There are two reasons to build this continental railroad. America had dreamed about it for 20 years. But at that time, gold was discovered 10 years ago. And America need to speed up moving people to the West. They need to speed up immigration to the West Coast. And another reason is the southern states wanted to become independent from America in order to keep slaves. And California Governor Stanford wrote to Lincoln that he will send natural resources from West Coast to East to support Lincoln once the railroad is built. See on the left corner, you see these are the red state who want to keep slave. So they want to be independent. But Lincoln got support from West Coast. So it is very important for Lincoln to have this railroad to link West Coast to the East Coast. So then the Congress in 1862, Congress passed two laws. Number one, Homestead Act. This law grants up to 160 acres of land to each male adult in the family. And number two is to build a railroad. So to speed up immigration. So this is here we see this picture is Lincoln at the end of railroad in Council Bluffs, Iowa. He was looking at the best path with General Dodge to link the railroad from east to west. So Lincoln was directly involved in this railroad, but he didn't live to see it because he was assassinated. Okay, a question is, why bring laborers from China? There was a shortage of laborers because of Civil War. And also it was very hard to get immigrants from Europe to go to California. Also, railroad workers had to sleep in tents, and few people want to take that job. And also Chinese people were assigned to the most dangerous jobs. Many tunnels were built with explosives and hand tools only. I think in total, there are like 15 tunnels on Sierra. You see here in the middle, you see this highlighted portion of this cabin. This is where they mix explosives. And in the middle, you see this man with a hat. This is Chinese. And the telegraph lines were set up in order to report daily construction progress to Washington, D.C. Lincoln had given 14 years to finish this railroad, but it was completed in only 7 years. Unfortunately, Lincoln did not get to see this railroad. After the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, it takes only 8 days from New York to California. Before, in order to travel from New York to California, you have to either go through Panama or go to all the way to Argentina. Either way, it's going to take you like 3 months. Very dangerous trip. Many people, even the engineer of this railroad, Judah, he died in this travel because he got a pandemic. Okay, let's see. Let's see what happened to Chinese next. 13th Amendment freed slaves. 14th Amendment granted citizenship to African descendants. And in 1870, Congress was talking about giving voting right to African Americans. So at this time, Massachusetts Senator Sumner, he said we should strip out the word white. You have to be white to be citizen, because everybody should be able to be naturalized. But Nevada Senator William Stewart launched a filibuster to go against it, because William Stewart didn't want to give this right to Chinese. Here we have a ticket, voting ticket. You can see what was they are talking about. No Negro or Chinese suffrage. But this is a William Stewart, and he was strong. He was strong in his position in denies the right to citizenship to Chinese. And that's why Chinese people were late in getting voting rights 70 years later in African Americans. And we can see this, what railroad did in developing America. This is railroad map in 1870. you can see on the East Coast, America has a very complete network of railroads. But this transcontinental railroad was the only one on the West Coast, on the west side of Mississippi River. 10 years later than of the completion of the first transcontinental continental railroad, many railroads were built. Okay. Years later, the U.S. Census Superintendent formally announced that the country's frontier had been settled. This couldn't be done by the first transcontinental continental railroad. And actually, there's 3 transcontinental continental railroad: Northern Transcontinental Continental and Southern Transcontinental Continental Railroad. And both of these, Northern and Southern, Chinese or assign the most difficult jobs. Whenever there's nobody take the job, for example, in deserts, Arizona is so hot, and they hire Chinese. But when they reach somewhere, there's other people can be hired, they fire Chinese. Same thing in the Northern Transcontinental Continental Railroad. Then after Alaska became part of America, Chinese were also pioneers there. They were in mining, in salmon can industry, and in services like cooking and laundry. Here we have a picture of a bakery of a Chinese, because other Chinese were gun-pointed to get out of the job and go back to San Francisco. They were actually expelled from even Alaska. And this particular image was in Oregon, but Alaska had Chinese salmon can workers too. And also in 1879, US Navy sent an Arctic expedition to look for a path to reach the North Pole. And they had shipwreck. And this crew had 3 Chinese in the crew. One was fired before when they got to Alaska, and one perished of hunger and cold in Siberia. Another one came back. The entire crew won medal from Congress and Navy. You see this, this young man standing on the back, Charles Tongxing, he was Chinese. This is his medal. This medal is still online for auction. And also in the Yellowstone National Park, let me show some very early Chinese. This house on the right corner, this is the first hotel built in Yellowstone National Park. Very soon they built a bigger one, and they let this one, and they let the laundry run in this house. And here we see the owner of this laundry house. And on the top, you see the name of this laundry's name. I think the laundry name is Toy Laundry. The name is Toy Laundry. It's printed on the top. Unfortunately, you can't see it. And here we have a census record of Chinese in Yellowstone National Park. And also in the Yosemite, we have this story is quite known. This when U.S. government had an important survey crew, and they had this Chinese cook, and they even Xing, his name is Xing, even a peak is named after him, Xing Peak. You can find Yosemite, there is a Xing Peak, is named after this cook. This is Xing. And he was Chinese workers were also involved in building road, cooking, hotel, and hotel laundry. Okay, next section we talk about Chinese Exclusion Act. Only 4 years later, after the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, Chinese became scapegoats of the 1870 economic recession. The most popular slogan was "The Chinese must go." So you see here is a rally by the mayor, and here is a cover. cover cartoon. It says Chinese, if you don't go, you take a bullet. And California even formed a party, and the goal of this party is to get Chinese out of this country. And also the politicians took advantage of this anti-Chinese sentiment to win votes. For example, the Maine Senator, James Blaine, was abolitionist because he believed in equal rights for all men. But later, when he was running for president, he needed the votes from the West Coast. Then he turned himself as outspoken leader of anti-Chinese movement. This cartoon was created by Thomas Nast in New York to criticize what James Blaine was doing to Chinese. This side is Chinese. He has no vote because we said in the senator from Nevada denied voting rights to Chinese. So that's why the politician didn't need Chinese. And on the other side, he protected the other laborers because they had a vote. But we are both under system of equal rights for all men. Okay, this is the political map in 1880. That was election year. Republican Party had control on the north, and the Democrat Party has the south. And the west was new territory, and Oregon and California together had 8 electorates. These are pretty much swing states. So let's see this voting ticket for the mayor of San Francisco. He used the anti-Chinese movement for his win. His campaign promise is within 24 hours of his election, he will deport all Chinese. And the ticket says, on the bottom, it says, he was the first who started the ball rolling and kept it rolling. It says perseverance, Chinese exclusion. And here on this globe, you see Chinese depicted here. And this is about not only about city election, it's also about federal election. You see all these politicians, because Chinese had no votes, this is a cartoon. 1882 political cartoon of politicians showing unanimity on the issue of Chinese immigration by beating a Chinese worker. The title is, when politicians do agree, their unanimity is wonderful. On the bottom, it says, give it to him. He had got no votes nor friends. And even in 1880, which is a presidential election year, even the October surprise is about Chinese labor. One candidate faked a letter saying that the opponent agreed to hire Chinese. So as a consequence, just 48 hours before the voting in 1880, an anti-Chinese riot broke out in Denver, Colorado. Today, we have a memorial in Denver about that riot. This is a cover page in the same year about two presidential candidates. And they are both nailing a Chinese, where both platforms agree, no vote, no use to either party. And not surprisingly, 2 years later, the Chinese exclusion passed. The cover page of the WASP says, an anti-Chinese bill. And this man is a drafter of the Chinese Exclusion Act. He is California Senator Miller. And following the passage of Chinese Exclusion Act, the violence against Chinese lasted more than 20 years in the Northeast America. For example, this Rock Spring Massacre, at least 28 Chinese miners were killed and 15 were injured. And this is a picture of Frederick B., a lawyer on Chinese side. After the incident, he traveled to the Rock Spring to collect the evidence. And in 1882 and 1887, separate in Tacoma and in Seattle, there were Chinese expulsion. And these were led even by the city officials. I'm very grateful and proud of my friend, Greg Noakes. He was a news reporter. He discovered a massacre of 34 Chinese miners at Hell's Canyon and published a book on it. And he decided to name it, to put a name in the massacre place. And this is what we see. They are putting a memorial stone. This is Greg interviewing Jimmy Carter, and this is his book. And the next, let me talk more about heroes who stand up against racial injustice. America's greatest politician cartoonist, Thomas Nast, he published many cartoons speaking out against this injustice. For example, here on the left, this woman is a symbol of Colombia. He's symbol of justice. She's protecting Chinese labor. And on the back, these are all the derogatory words against Chinese. Coolie, slave, pauper, rat eater, barbarian, idiots. And on the right side, you see a man beating Chinese. On the back, you see railroad and mining. This is where the Chinese work. And then on the back, you see a courthouse. It says, Court of Justice closed to Chinese. Extra taxes to Yellow Jacks. And Frederick Douglass argued for Chinese immigrants. And he delivered a speech in Boston in 1868. He said, I've said that the Chinese will come and have given some reasons why we might expect them in very large numbers in no very distant future. Do you ask if I favor such immigration? I answer I would. Would you have them naturalized and have them invested in all the rights of American citizenship? I would. Would you allow them to vote? I would. Would you allow them to hold office? I would. This is Frederick Douglass. He's a hero. And Douglass said the 15th Amendment, which allow African Americans to vote, seemed to shield me as a hide of the rhino. But Chinese at that time did not have this shield. And this is a Chinese student. He spoke against Chinese exclusion. He said, this country is the land of liberty for men of all nations except the Chinese. I consider it as an insult to us Chinese to call us to contribute toward building he means building the Miss Liberty's pedestal. This is he was writing a letter about it. He said, but all the Chinese are allowed to come. No, let me read from the statue represents liberty holding a torch, which lights the passage of those of all nations who come into this country. But are the Chinese allowed to come? As for the Chinese who are here, are they allowed to enjoy liberty as men of all other nationalities enjoy it? Are they allowed to go about everywhere, free from insults, abuse, assaults, wrongs, and injuries from which men of other nationalities are free? His name is Sao Songbo. He was a Chicago medical school student, and there at that time very few Chinese speak English. So he was one of the educated person, and he dared to speak out. And this is another man who was a Columbia University graduate. He went to law school, very bright, but he was denied the right. He could never become a lawyer because he was Chinese. If Chinese were not allowed to become a US citizen, then Chinese, no matter how good you are, you cannot practice medicine and you cannot practice law. So the Chinese exclusion is not only against Chinese labor, it's against the entire race. And this is Massachusetts advocates. And he spoke for Chinese in 1902. He said, there are a lot of excuses for not giving Chinese for the Chinese exclusion, and he spoke against it. He said there's only one method to getting people to assimilate: treat them with respect and see them as brothers. The Chinese are peaceful, hardworking, and patient. We must give them equal rights and treat them sincerely. Otherwise, we have no right to blame them for being clannish. Also, in response to alleged inability of Chinese to assimilate into American society, famous New York societal activist Henry Ward mockingly said the following: "We attack Chinese with sticks and stones. We burn down their homes and kill their people. Yet they still do not believe in our religion. We want to show them heaven, so we have to send them there with explosives." Also, another excuse for the Chinese exclusion is Chinese send their money home to China. And this is what Garrison said. Is there anything wrong with sending money back home? If so, why does no one has a problem with Irish and German who do the same thing? The Chinese send back in thousands, while the Irish and Germans send back in millions. The Swiss, Irish, and other people come to America exclusively to send money to those back home. Around Christmas, just one German steamboat carries over $1.1 million to Germany. Loving your family and respecting your parents are virtues that should be lauded. That should be lauded. Those who cast blame upon others, who cherish their family, bring disgrace upon themselves. Okay, number 3, some people say they have competition with American labor. Garrison said, at the time, America desperately needed labor, so the Chinese came. They did not come to take the jobs. I remember how needed Chinese workers were when the construction began on the Northern Pacific Railroad 20 years ago. In Oregon, I heard about how difficult it was to find enough workers. Number 3, excuse number 3, they do not spend money and they are too frugal. Garrison said, being frugal is a virtue in New England. The industry titans of Standard Oil Company and the steel industry spend lavishly, yet Lincoln's contribution to the nation greatly surpassed them. If being frugal is a crime, then Lincoln should have been deported. Garrison also said, the Forbes, these are opium dealers, merchants, U.S. merchants in old China trade. The Forbes, Russell, Cunningham families all made illicit fortune off opium in China. Yet they took the money back to America to invest. Do we call them immoral for doing so? So this is double standard. Number 5, excuse number 5, the Chinese live in crowded, dirty dwellings. Who is to blame for this? The oppressed obviously need to stick together. They share common habits and a common language. Other races have all done the same thing until eventually learning to mingle under the sunlight of freedom. However, the sunlight of American freedom has never shone upon Chinese, and they had no choice but to congregate in crowded, unclean quarters, because our prejudice prevents them from improving their livelihood. Also, let me introduce a principal leader. He was a Massachusetts senator. During his life as a senator, 20 years, every time there's a debate in Congress about Chinese exclusion, he voted no. Okay, let's see. This is the last time. This is 2 years before his death. There was a debate in Congress. 76 were in favor of Chinese exclusion, and he was the only one. At that time, he was already very weak. He had no time. He just spoke briefly when he voted no. He said, I hold that every human soul has its rights, dependent upon individual personal worth and not dependent upon color or race. As this bill, he means the Chinese exclusion, as this bill violates that principle, I'm bound to record my protest if I stand alone. Even now, during pandemic, Chinese community in Boston give him memorial every year. Now let's go back. We talked about the William Stewart, senator from Nevada, who denied voting rights to Chinese. At the end, like after 20 years, when finally the Chinese exclusion law became permanent, he was so happy. He celebrated his vision. He said, if they had been allowed to become naturalized and become voters, he means Chinese, there probably never would have been any exclusion, but there would have been great trouble. So he sees Chinese as trouble. This is a Boston Chinese community held memorial every year for Senator Howard. So he's a hero. My friend Wilson Lee set up a award in Senator's name. Another hero who was a vice president to Lincoln. And he voted no to Chinese exclusion law too. He said, I shall vote against this measure, and I leave that vote the last legacy to my children, that they may esteem it the brightest act of my life. This is Hannibal Hamlin. In the Congress statue gallery, you have this, you can see Hamlin's statue. And this man from Massachusetts too, Henry Nathan, he also spoke against Chinese exclusion. He said, with one exception, the test imposed by or suggested against those seeking the hospitality of our shores have been standards of character, education, and property, not racial. We have drawn the race line only against one nationality. In other cases, we admit the people and exclude the individuals. In the Chinese case, we admit the individuals and exclude the people. As this Robert Hitt, he said, never before in a free country was there such a system of tagging a man like a dog to be caught by the police and examined. And if his tag or collar was not all right, taken to the pound or drawn it or shot. Never before was it applied by a free people to a human being, with the exception of the sad days of slavery. He was talking about identification. Not only the law exclude all the Chinese to enter the US, the ones who are already here must wear an ID, and only Chinese have to do that, to have this ID. If you are caught without ID, even the ID is at your home, they throw you into jail, then they deport you. You don't have to prove anything. So how the Chinese exclusion law was repealed in 1943, that was because of the World War II. And after Pearl Harbor, US and China become world allies. And suddenly the narrative about the Chinese had been described as stupid, low class, dishonest, and unhygienic. Now the media depict Chinese as honest, likable, intelligent, and possess an ancient civilization. Pearl Bach, the daughter of American missionaries in China, he was a leader in advocating this appeal. Because Japanese, she even went to Congress to tell the congressman, you can't be racist if you want to win this war. And she was married to a publisher, and they put an advertisement advocating for the repeal. And they got support from the President Roosevelt and his wife. The president urged Congress to repeal Chinese Exclusion Act as a war aid, because the Japanese was using this one to tell Chinese that you can't be friends with Americans. They even have a law to bar your people to even enter that country. And Roosevelt said, nations like individuals make mistakes. We must be big enough to acknowledge our mistakes of the past and to correct them. By the repeal of the Chinese exclusion laws, we cannot correct a historic mistake, but silence the distorted Japanese propaganda. So the repeal of this law is to silence the Japanese propaganda. And also during the World War II, even the Chinese exclusion law was still in action. There's many Asian Americans joined army. But when the Chinese exclusion law was repealed, only U.S. still had an immigration quota, which they allow 105 Chinese worldwide into U.S. per year. So when did Chinese immigration really started? Is after the civil rights movement led by Martin Luther King. First, in 1964, U.S. passed Equal Rights Act. So how Chinese benefited from it? Because before racial segregation ended, okay, before Chinese in South could not attend public schools in certain area. Like these two girls, they were kicked off school because they were not Caucasians. Their parents filed lawsuit, but they lost lawsuit, so they have to sell their store and move to another state that allow Chinese in the public school. So when racial segregation ended, so Chinese in America can go to any school. And in next year, Immigration Act was passed. You can see this from this chart. You have the number of Chinese immigration. So you can see starting the 60s, the Chinese immigration arose dramatically. Okay, number 6, sorry, Chinese Americans today. So this is Baby Ming, architect, this is physicist, this is Maya Lin, this is a congressman. Okay. And here, this is former US Secretary of Transportation, Elaine. Okay, her father, James Zhao, founder of the foremost shipping group, a shipping, trading, and finance enterprise. And also Mr. Mock, Samuel Mock, served as Chief Financial Officer of the US Department of Labor from January 2001 to May 2007. Okay, anti-Asian hate. Well, Chinese people are very active. I think there is a political awareness with this anti-Chinese hate. So let me introduce one person. I know her grandmother, Ava, was second-year Harvard student. When she saw the rise in hate crime against Asian Americans, Ava was deeply hurt, and she felt terror and anger. Ava created 9 drawings to tell her family history of 6 generations in America. She said, tell our stories in order to change our future. I give you one example from one drawing from her picture. In 1887, an arson fire destroyed Chinatown in San Jose, California. Ava's ancestors lost home and livelihood. And so we know the anti-Asian hate today is not something new, but something old. Just like Professor Eric Lee is a professor in University of Minnesota. She went to Congress hearing on the anti-Asian hate, and she says the following at Congress. They are an expression of our country's long history of systemic racism targeting Asian Americans, Asian AAPI. And this history is not often taught in our schools. In order to make a change, we first have to face our history. So for more readings and more information, I recommend PBS documentaries, Asian Americans, and PBS documentary, The Chinese Exclusion Act. Do I have more? Okay, this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so very much. That was splendid. I was just blown away by some of the information that you shared that I had never known about. I'm going to open up to questions now, if that's okay.
Sure. Thank you.
But I want to maybe start by saying a lot of the things that you shared, this discrimination against Chinese Americans that happened in the late 1800s, early 1900s, did that discrimination translate to other Asian Americans, Japanese Americans, Indian Americans, Filipino Americans, or was it just on the Chinese Americans?
Oh, thank you for very good question. In the documentary, I just recommended Asian Americans. I learned a lot about discrimination against Indian Americans. I was shocked. For example, and I didn't know this. I didn't see it's about citizenship. Okay, I know. Let me tell a story. There's an Indian American. He is an immigrant from India, and in California, he joined World War II. He was a soldier there, and also there's a merchant in San Francisco. He killed himself. He was married with kids. He killed himself for what? Because in the beginning, they were allowed to become US citizens. Then, like in the beginning of 20th century, like 1921 or 22, I don't remember, they passed a law about US citizenship. You have to be Caucasian. And by the definition, whatever they was arguing, that by being descent of Indian, he was not Caucasian. So, but he was already American citizen. You know what they can do? They even actually took his citizenship away. So at that time, it's when you are not US citizen, as I said, not only you cannot practice law, not practice medicine, no matter how good you are, and he had no right to own the house, to own the property. He had a tea store, he had a spice store, and he had a house and wife, kids. You know he's going to lose everything. And what he did, he doesn't want to, he rented a room in San Francisco and he killed himself. See, I was told some Berkeley students are talking about name a street after him. So not only him, couple of Indian immigrants were stripped, they got the citizenship stripped out, taken away. Sorry. And also,
you just imagine this happened in the United States, that you could actually have your citizenship stripped away.
Yeah.
That is unbelievable. That's awful.
Yes. And it's not only you have citizenship. At that time, if you're not a US citizen, you cannot own the property. And he lost everything this way. And I think he may have problem going back to India because he was against British rule. So he's kind of, because he was against British rule, that's why he had to find refuge here. But now he lost everything. So we all know what happened to Japanese Americans. And you just talk about Dr. Exactly. You know, we have a webinar. We just invited him to speak at our webinar, and this is what happened. Yes. So, and also so that's why I learned so much from this documentary about. I had questions about. I have same question as you. What happened to other Asian groups? And after I watched this documentary, And they had very good research on Vietnamese and other ethnic groups, and also about what happened after September 11, this racial profiling, like to Muslim group. A young man went to park, took a picture, and people blame him. That's like, I don't know. He was his green card was taken away and he was sent back to Pakistan or somewhere. See, that reminds me something. Once I was taking a taxi, only after that documentary, I recall something. Once I was taking taxi, and I told taxi to go here. He went to wrong place. I say, okay, let's make a turn, go here. But we accidentally entered in the police parking place. And suddenly he becomes so nervous. I said, why you tell me to come here? I said, that's okay. We make a turn, we go back. But he would become so nervous. And I didn't, and the police came and said, what I said? I said, no, we need to make a turn. I know that's the police's parking lot. And after I watched this documentary, I understand. Because he was probably Muslim, and he was so scared to enter any like this kind of facilities and be blamed of your taking information or something. Mm-hmm. So this is what I learned. So we have to, so I say, for example, when September 11 happened, I was working at a bank on Wall Street. I had colleagues from India. And whenever there's a meeting, he need to go to another room, go to another building. That means he had to leave our office and go to straight across and go to another building. He asked me to go with him. And I said, why? I'm busy too. Oh, now after a while, I understand. He was scared that somebody would blame, didn't like his turban. So if I go with him, I can explain, So I think it is very important to see Asian as a whole group. Once we start easily we start from our group's journey, but we don't stop here. We see it as a racial prejudice. It's not only to your group, it's to many groups. So we should support each other, understand each other. Like you see, like how the civil rights movement from the 60s, liberated, helped all the ethnic groups. So before that, Chinese girls were kicked out from school because you are not Caucasian, right?
Yeah, can you imagine kicking children out of school? That's unbelievable.
Exactly. So I'm so happy we have Martin Luther King.
Yeah. Well, can you maybe expand upon that more? Because I thought that was really fascinating. From Frederick Douglass' time to Martin Luther King, that very early on, the African American community was advocating for the Chinese American community and saying, we should let these people vote. We should let, and I think the quote from Frederick Douglass was like, I have the 15th Amendment like a rhinoceros skin to protect me. And Chinese Americans don't have that. Are there any other ways you think that just in the modern day we can form these like linkages? I think you're absolutely right. I mean, racism, prejudice is extremely bad no matter what race it is. And if you stand apart, you're more likely to be hurt and attacked. But if you work together, towards unity and understanding, you're less likely. Do you have any suggestions for our audience or thoughts about how we can do that with other ethnic groups, not just within the Asian, continent or so, but, outside our African American colleagues and friends, or Hispanic, Latin, or others?
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with you. Like recently, I went to an installation at New York Historical Society. They have installation on Frederick Douglass. At that time, I tell you how Chinese, from there, I noticed there's a Chinese leader who were inspired, a Chinese leader at the same time as Frederick Douglass, and he was inspired by Frederick Douglass. He said Frederick Douglass did a lot of good things for his race. I want to do the same thing for my race. So you see, he was so inspired by Frederick Douglass. And I think Chinese language is very hard. And Chinese was very close to the country, and people did not have access to learn English. So this, you can see still the effect of Chinese immigrants here. So I think it's very important for Chinese people to reach out other ethnic groups to learn the language and culture and get ourselves familiar with the political system here, to participate in more events like this, where it's not only Chinese language, but you have to know other ethnic groups' history and their concern and their struggle. And recently I see in the Black Lives Matter movement, Chinese, I see a lot of young Chinese community leaders joining, supporting Black Lives Matter movement. And I think this is very important. And with all the more, now there are more and more Chinese paying more attention in like different levels of voting. And I think this is, and also as I said, anti-Chinese hate, there is after this, there is a political awakening. And the people still need education on what exactly we need to do and how to do it. So definitely, I think we need leaders to go out to educate our Chinese community and to build bridges between Chinese community and other communities. And also we have to see it's not only Chinese, some issues are not only about Chinese, one group. We have to see it's actually about racial justice. For example, you can see, for example, we can see how much Chinese people benefited from the racial segregation with employment equality. See, before I heard so many Chinese older generation tell me, oh, my father got a physics degree from Stanford, but he could never find a job. I heard so many people telling me, and only they get hired after the civil rights movement.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that part of what you're saying too is for people to unify, they also need to understand the history. And I think a lot of times, I mean, interestingly enough, literally right before I got on here, I was talking to a coworker about the Army, the U.S. Army, the 442nd unit, the fighting unit that was World War II.
Yeah.
It was Japanese American.
Yes.
Who, a lot of Japanese Americans were interned. But these Japanese Americans were a combat unit that were sent to fight the Nazis on the European fronts. And they were the most decorated, I think they are still the most decorated combat unit in American history.
Yes.
And they served our country so well. But my colleague, he said, I've never heard of them. I didn't know anything about them. And I find that a lot. I mean, because I had worked for Mr. Mineta, I learned a lot about that type of history, but I think, in school, I never heard about any of it or about a lot of the stuff that you were talking about. I didn't know that there were Chinese Americans in Alaska or a number of the things that you talked about or going to the North Pole. Why do you think that is that maybe, and I'm sure I know very little about, the Latin culture and race coming here or a number of other cultures and races. Why do you think that is that we know so little? And to your point about, getting to know each other and knowing their history, what do you think we could do to improve that?
Thank you so much. This is a wonderful question. Actually, I just invited the Illinois representative to share her experience in making the state law of including the Asian American history into K-12 curriculum. And there is a movement in many states in doing this, in many states. And even I invited Ms. Grace Meng to talk about it. She's talking about setting up a museum, AAPI museum in National Mall. And there is a lack, just you said, there is a lack in education, in our education about AAPI history. And so this is something we really, really have to start now. So because why Asians are seen like perpetual foreigners? We look different and we speak different. And also people don't see you as part of this country. Even Chinese people could have been here for 7 generations, but another people from Europe, any European country, he could be just come here, but seen as our people. But if you have been here if your family has been here for 6, 7 generations, you're still being seen foreigners. This concept was built in our textbook. Every time about American, about pioneer, about who built this country, we have to show different faces, right? So we let kids have the different a concept that America was built by different colors. So this is very important to include the Asian American history into our K-12 curriculum.
Oh, wow. That is a really relevant and excellent point, that, America was built by many cultures and colors, right? Of people.
Yes.
Yeah. And I don't think that story is being told. I want to ask our audience if they have any questions, and if they wanted to put any questions or raise your hand, and I will, call on you if you have any questions. And while we're doing that, I want to ask you one more question, Kathy, if I can indulge.
Sure.
So, we see a lot of this kind of anti-immigrant hate right now with people of Latin descent.
Latin descent.
Yeah, Hispanic, Latin descent or so. And, a lot of times, I see almost some parallels between, the Chinese Americans were asked to come here to help build the railroad, the infrastructure. So a lot of, the Hispanic, folks are asked to come here to help with labor also, right?
Yes.
But they're facing some of the similar things. Are you seeing parallels, and are there some maybe lessons learned from what Chinese Americans faced that maybe we cannot repeat some of those same mistakes with maybe some of the Hispanic folks who are coming over?
Yeah, I definitely see. I see all that is, regardless you're against people from Latin America. I'm fluent in Spanish. I know Latin culture and I love it. And regardless you're talking about, for example, New York City has a New York City ID. Yeah, I don't know if you know about this. And it's issued for so-called illegal immigrants. But I did apply for one. I'm a US citizen. I think, I think this is the same concept that America has to be from Europe, Caucasian. So you are seen as true American, typical American, real American, the kind of people can lead. So I think it's very important to change this concept, to set this right. It's not change, set it right. And when I see if American accept people of different colors, and as they should, because this country was built by people of different colors. Look at the South, all the plantation fields, who was working there? So many people get rich. How rich I tell you how rich they can buy islands. And other people cannot feed their kids. So the entire economy of South was built on the back of blacks. But where are they now? So we have to think about this racial equality instead of racial, we have to do this racial equality. It's good for everybody. It's not only, okay, I think Asian people, our Chinese, especially when I speak to Chinese, you don't see this problem belong to only Latinos. Right. No, it's belong to non-colored colored people like you and me. If they can accept Latinos, can accept African Americans as real Americans, they will be able to accept Asian Americans. It's about if you're colored or not colored. But this is how I see it. I see a question.
Yeah, let's see. We have Ho Jung Garland. Ho Jung, you have your question?
Yeah, thank you so much for coming to give a presentation for us with such a amazing content like this. We really appreciate it for your participation on that. Um, and I think that you started already alluding a little bit, but yeah, I do see that these kind of racial issues are not just limited to Asian American, but also Latinos and also African American as well. And additionally, I mean, we tend to frame this more like a black and brown communities issue, but like my husband happened to be, Caucasian, but yet Jewish, they're also dealing with anti-Semitism as well. So it's not just the skin color, but also like, different aspect is kicking in. So, do you have any suggestions how we can work, well with other, groups like this to be more united and be able to work with the racial equity aspect. If you can elaborate a little more, I'd appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I think you can definitely tell me more, educate me more on this issue. And I think, just as I said, the concept is still, okay, if you're European, Anglo-Saxon descent, so you are true American, no problem. And all others, to a certain extent, but Jewish are okay. Jewish, so to a certain extent, all ethnic groups suffer to a certain extent in some areas, some kind of discrimination. So this is something I'm very happy to see all ethnic groups have this awareness and work together. And also, especially I've been talking to Chinese people, which I know better, that whenever there's a issue, racial injustice issue, we should not only see again about Chinese, we have to think this actually goes to all other ethnic groups like Latinos, African Americans, even Jewish Americans. So we should support each other and understand in the bigger context. So it's not only Chinese or not Chinese, but it's probably more like European descent, Anglo-Saxon descent, and all other people, and people from other background, cultural or ethnic backgrounds. Thank you for a wonderful question. I'm sorry, you know better than me. Yes.
So let me ask you this too. In your research and all, maybe what are some of like the most unknown contributions of Chinese Americans to the American culture that people, they just take for granted, they don't really think about? Or what would you say are some of the most notable ones? I mean, we know, of course, the railroad, the extension of the railroad, but what maybe are some other things that people may not be aware of?
Oh, I don't know if there's something like technology or something in education. Currently, there are a lot of, I know there are a lot of faculties or school workers, administrators, or back office technology people working, but you never see our face.
So like the backbone, a lot of organizations, a lot of the, again, all of the labor, right?
Yeah, a lot of,
you see.
Chinese people are, due to language or whatever, so a lot of people are working in back office, but on the face, but you never see our face. So there are like a lot of people working on science, technology research, like medical research, but you never know. But when the results are published or something or applied, people benefit, but people don't know there are so many Chinese, Asian Americans working on it, like in medical fields, in pharmaceutical fields.
Very good, very good.
Yeah.
So our audience here, we are in the Washington suburbs. We're not as diverse as New York City, but we are a fairly diverse community of people from all over the world, a lot of international, because we have a lot of the embassies in this area and all. So you have a very diverse population right now listening to you. What advice would you give to any and all people, maybe non-Asian people who are listening, on what they can do, or what are good ways to connect with the Chinese American, Asian American community, maybe tangible things they can do, to better build this equity, this bridge of equity that you've been discussing?
I think first, people can watch documentaries because these are very good quality to know the history, to know what people, what happened to Asian people in America, because it is many times it still repeat, and people still have the concept there. Now people are still treating the same thing, same bad thing can still happen. And first is to have understanding, and after this, I think people can, if you read news, if you see some news regarding Chinese community, people can read a little bit more, so people can be more aware, a little bit more aware of what's going on with Asian Americans.
What would you recommend within an organization? So all of these people, we all work together, or so. What could we do as an organization to raise awareness? You know, like, I mean, this is one of the steps, is having you speak to us, you know, about history. History is so very important for people to understand, you know, a person, a culture, and maybe a perspective that they don't have. But what other practical ways would you suggest we could devise to be a lot more open-minded, culturally accepting within our work environment?
That's a good question. I think if you have some work employee from different culture, I think people can have a casual talk, and also I think it doesn't have to be Asian. It's I think it's the same thing, because let's say if you have people from South America, when he talks about how he feels when he first arrived and his struggles that other people do not go through, and his journey here, how, let's say if he has been here for 20 years, you know, let him talk about the first 5 years, what kind of, you know, what kind of adaptation, cultural change, his difficulties, and how he got assimilated into American culture, and people become more aware, because many things, you grew up here, you were born here, you take everything for granted, but you don't know when the immigrant come here, there's so much they have to learn. Something so easy to you, but to me it could be completely new. Now it's much easier for a person who is from China to here, because we have internet and all these pictures, cell phones, communication. But at my time, it was so different. When I got here, everything looks different. Like when you cross the street, the kind of lights are different, and the street number, a lot of things. And the store, I tell you, when I first come as a student, I went to supermarket, I couldn't find salt. And and I said, where do they sell salt? They said, in grocery. I said, I went there, didn't find, do they sell? Do you know how salt in America look like? The pack is different. I said, yes, but let me go back. You know, even this kind of things, it's nothing to you, but it's something to me. So when we have this perspective, we know, okay, if that happens to a people, this is what a person from a different country has to go through. But now with internet, everything is much easier. But still, if people can have some like empathy, understand different culture, the experience of the person from different culture, I think people can understand each other better.
I think that's a very excellent point, and being able to seek that out, and being able to share your own culture, right? And people may not ask things in the most elegant way, right? And not to be offended, but know that people are asking, right?
Believe me, I made that mistake so many times, because in my culture, you know, when we learn English, it's pretty much translate from what we say in Chinese into English. But English could be something. It only even happen between me and my daughter when we're texting. She said, but then immediately I found, oh, there's a miscommunication, because I'm translating from my Chinese question, but that question could sound rude to English speaker. But she's so used to people like you, right? Educated and born here. But she said, how come you say that to me? That immediately I thought, oh, no, I have to recall that message. See, imagine if this works in workplace. So if people from here can be aware of the difficulties of people from foreign country, I think that will be better. It will be better for both sides. You don't have to get upset, and I don't have to get scared.
To be just a little more understanding, right? A little more
Yeah,
understanding, a
absolutely.
little more forgiving,
Yeah,
maybe.
absolutely, absolutely.
I remember my father, he would take a little bit of time, and my friends would always say, why does your dad take us? They said he's very well spoken. He's a college professor.
Oh,
And I had to explain to them, well, he's translating because he's, Chinese and Thai. I said, he's translating things from Chinese to Thai in his head and then to English. I said, so he's translating 3 times. And I said, so it takes him, it takes him a second or so. I said, but he also wants to be precise.
exactly.
And to be understood properly. So,
Absolutely, absolutely. So people, when I first made a mistake, I become so scared to talk because I really don't want to offend anyone. So that's why people could be more cautious or look, don't have confidence, but you have to see our concern. Thank you for being so understanding.
yeah, well, let me leave you with the last word. If there is a last piece of advice or word or wisdom that you would like to share with us, what would that be?
I think we should work together, and even people in the beginning, we have a little bit difficulty, and I think it is very important, and we must. And after all the difficulties and obstacles, we should work together, all the ethnic groups, to achieve better racial justice in America. This will be good for all the ethnic groups. This is my belief. Yeah.
Excellent advice. Excellent advice. Well, I thank you so much, Ms. Hong, for all of the information you've shared. I think the most shocked to find out that you could actually lose your citizenship. What you were talking about. That was very heart-wrenching. Yes. And I had no idea that could even happen. So yes. We'll be very aware and take a lot of your advice and a lot of the information to heart. Wanjan, is there anything else you would like to close out with, maybe, with the event?
Yeah, I'll take to our co-chairs and Angeli Sood and Ho Jiang Garland, because they are the chair of our organizing committee of this year's AANHPI events. Okay, Angeli.
This is Anjali Sood, co-chair of the committee. I just want to thank Ms. Kathy Wang for a beautiful presentation. We learned a lot today, a lot of things we didn't know about. Thank you to Asanta for moderating the Q&A and getting so many answers for us. And special thanks to Yunjun for coordinating this event. It was an amazing event. Thank you, Yunjun. And then I would like to thank all our audience for joining it and joining the event. And I hope you all enjoyed it, just like I did. And not to say the least, I would like to thank the committee, all the committee members, Zubin, Hi Sue, Rebecca Bello, Shirley Campos, Angelica, Yunjun, Jay Mukherjee, Casey, Shashi Sharma, Karen Yi, Wan Yung, Suchi Vera, Christy Helrich, and Asanta and Mr. Pratap Verma. Thank you all for doing such an amazing job and helping with planning all these wonderful events. And these month celebration is to honor and recognize contributions from all the Asian countries. So thank you for joining. And I know you guys are all waiting for this moment. Now I'm going to do the drawing. And let's see who's the lucky winner of 2 prizes today. I have all the names in this bowl. And I'm going to pull 2 out. But remember, you have to be present to win a prize. Archie Chen, Montgomery Planning, is she here? If you're here, please raise your hand.
Could you repeat the name again?
Archie Chen. please, with Montgomery County Planning.
No, I don't see her name.
Yeah.
Probably have, yeah, some people have to leave because they have other
Okay.
meetings.
So, okay, so Josh K. from Montgomery Parks. Josh K.
Oh, Josh,
Uh,
He's
Josh
not
K.
here at this moment.
Okay, so I'm going to keep going on. Khalid. Khalid from Montgomery Planning.
He's here.
He's here. Okay,
Khalid,
you
yes.
will get, yeah, you'll get a surprise. We'll
Right.
arrange for it to be delivered. Okay, I have to pull one more. Okay, this is Rebecca. Hold on, Rebecca. She's in the committee. I'm sorry. How did I leave her name? Sorry. We took out the committee members. Pauline, are you still here?
Yes.
Pauline from Human Resources. So you are the winner of the second prize. We'll arrange to send it to you. I'll be in touch with you.
I'm sorry. I thought you said Khalid.
No, Khalid and Colleen, both of you
Okay.
got one. Yeah.
Thank you.
So there were two drawings. Thank you very much all for joining. We'll see you again at the next event. We have a tour of downtown Wheaton on the 10th. If you haven't registered, we have limited seating, so please make sure you register if you haven't registered and if there's still any spots left. Thank you again. Enjoy rest of the day and have a great weekend.
Thank you so much, all.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Thank you.
Alfonso.
Have
And
a good
thank you for
weekend.
our speaker. And she is in DC for a conference from New York. I appreciate she.
Oh, we lucked
Yeah.
out. She's terrific, really
Every
terrific.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Santa.
just her lunch
you.
hour during the conference. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a wonderful, wonderful presentation. I appreciate
Oh,
it.
thank
And
you.
Alfonso is a wonderful moderator and prepared some very good questions
Yeah.
and
Oh,
lead
wow.
us. Yeah, we
That's why
all
nobody
learned.
else
We all
answered because
learned.
I'm sure she got all
Yeah,
the questions.
yeah, yeah.
Santa,
It's
maybe we
great.
can talk on the side about a few things, you know.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
Yeah.
it's great. On the screen, you can see our flyer for this year's events, and then the next one will be next week on Tuesday, May 10th. So please check your email and about the flyer and sign up for those wonderful events. I'm sure you will learn more. And like week 3, we have a yoga class during our fitness week. And also we have a documentary screening and the question and the answers. And for week 4, Wednesday, May 25th, we'll have a culture with a small C's. It's virtual, and they will have some displays in our Wheaton headquarters. So welcome, and thank you for your attending. And we are expecting and for you are attending more events. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a wonderful
Bye-bye,
weekend,
everyone.
guys.
Hi,
Bye.
Very
everyone.
nicely
Enjoy
done,
the
Kathy.
weekend,
Very
please.
nicely done.